The voicemail lasted 11 seconds, just long enough for investigators to hear a woman whisper, "I don't think he knows I called you," before the line filled with static, and then silence so complete it almost sounded intentional. When detectives enhanced the audio, they noticed something strange in the background, a faint metallic rattling, the squeak of what sounded like a gate, and one single word, spoken far away from the phone, by a man whose voice was too distorted to identify. Now, by the time officers reached the house, the front door was unlocked, the television was still playing, a pot of coffee had burned itself black on the kitchen counter, but the woman who made that call was gone. No blood, no signs of forced entry, nothing except her phone lying face down beneath the dining table, and a family photo torn perfectly in half. But first, detectives believed this would become another cold case swallowed by time, but they had no idea. They were standing at the beginning of something far bigger, because over the next several years, investigators would use 5 different forms of DNA testing to uncover truths hidden beneath floorboards, buried inside old envelopes, trapped under fingernails, floating through family trees, and preserved in places killers never imagined. And every single breakthrough would force detectives to confront the same terrifying realization: DNA remembers everything. Ashley Flowers leaned forward as she described the first case, her voice quiet in the way people speak when they know the ending still hurts. The victim had been found near a rural highway after disappearing on her way home from work. Investigators collected evidence immediately, but the technology at the time was painfully limited. Fibers were cataloged, fingerprints were lifted, witnesses were interviewed until their memories turned soft around the edges, but nothing stuck. The evidence locker slowly became a graveyard of unanswered questions, and eventually the case slipped into that terrible category detectives hate most. Enacted years later, a new forensic analyst reopened the box and focused on something almost invisible: skin cells trapped beneath the victim's fingernails, tiny traces, barely enough to see. Using STR testing, one of the most common forms of forensic DNA profiling, analysts built a genetic profile from material older investigators would have considered useless. The match pointed directly to a man who had once been interviewed and dismissed because his alibi seemed solid. But DNA didn't care about his story. He cared about contact, presence, biology, and suddenly the timeline detectives trusted for years began collapsing piece by piece. The second case started with a fire, a violent one. Neighbors described hearing an explosion before flames consumed the small home at the edge of town. Inside, investigators found remains so badly damaged that identifying the victim became nearly impossible. The husband claimed his wife had died in the blaze while he escaped through a back window. He cried during interviews, shook visibly, held onto investigators' hands a little too long when he thanked them for their work. Ashley explained how mitochondrial DNA testing changed everything. Unlike nuclear DNA, mitochondrial DNA can survive in degraded remains and is passed down through the maternal line. Analysts compared samples from the remains to the missing woman's maternal relatives, expecting confirmation. Instead, the DNA revealed the body wasn't hers at all. Detectives realized the woman had vanished before the fire even started, and the body inside the home belonged to someone else entirely. Suddenly, investigators weren't dealing with an accidental death. They were hunting a man who had staged an elaborate lie using another human being as cover. The third story felt almost impossible at first because it began with silence. No crime scene, no witnesses, no body. Just a little boy who stopped showing up to school and a mother whose explanations changed every time police asked questions. One week she said he was staying with relatives. Another week she claimed he was sick. Eventually, even neighbors stopped asking questions because people often choose comfort over suspicion when the alternative is too horrifying to imagine. Ashley described how investigators turned to familial DNA searching after traditional database. Searches failed completely. Instead of looking for an exact match, analysts searched for partial genetic similarities that might indicate a relative of the unknown suspect. That search eventually led detectives to a distant cousin of a man living 2 states away. He had no criminal record, no direct connection to the missing child. But once detectives started digging into his past, They uncovered a hidden relationship with the boy's mother and evidence placing him near the child shortly before the disappearance. The DNA didn't identify him immediately. The whisper toward him, and detectives followed the whisper until it became undeniable. One investigator admitted, "There are moments during interrogations when the room changes temperature, not literally, but emotionally. A suspect who had been calm suddenly stops blinking, stops moving, starts understanding the walls are closing in." That moment came during a decades-old homicide case involving a college student who vanished after leaving a party. For years, detectives believed she'd willingly left town. Some even accused her family of exaggerating their concerns. Then construction workers uncovered skeletal remains in a wooded area behind an abandoned property. Ashley explained how forensic genealogy entered the picture. Investigators uploaded crime scene DNA to public genealogy databases, searching for relatives connected to the unknown profile. That process took months. Family trees branched outward like spiderwebs across generations until one name kept resurfacing near the geographic center of the investigation: an aging former classmate, a man who had attended the same party the night the student disappeared. When detectives finally confronted him, they noticed something strange. Before they even mentioned DNA, he asked whether the body had been identified. Yet, the fifth case felt deeply personal because the evidence came from something intimate: a kiss. A young woman disappeared after a date with a man she'd met online. Surveillance cameras captured them leaving a restaurant together, laughing as they crossed the parking lot. After that, nothing. Her phone stopped moving. Her bank accounts went untouched. It was as if she had simply stepped out of existence. Weeks later, investigators located her abandoned vehicle near a riverbank. Inside the car, forensic analysts found a drinking glass containing trace saliva mixed with her lipstick. Ashley described how WeSTR DNA testing helped isolate the male genetic profile hidden within the sample. Unlike standard STR testing, WeSTR focuses specifically on male lineage markers, making it useful when male DNA is mixed with large amounts of female DNA. The results pointed investigators toward a suspect who insisted he barely knew her. But science measured intimacy differently than people did. His DNA inside that glass proved proximity he could no longer explain away. By this point, the stories were becoming heavier, darker, more unsettling because each breakthrough revealed not only what happened, but how long someone had gotten away with it. Ashley paused while describing the next investigation, almost as if she needed a second before continuing. The victim in this case had managed to call emergency services before disappearing, but the audio was distorted beyond recognition. Detectives replayed it for years, hoping to notice something new. Most people heard panic. One analyst heard breathing. Touch DNA became the turning point. Investigators re-examined the victim's steering wheel, door handle, and jacket zipper using newer collection techniques capable of recovering microscopic skin cells left behind through simple contact. The amount of DNA recovered was astonishingly small, but enough to build a partial profile, and that profile connected to a repeat offender who had never once been linked to the victim publicly. Detectives later discovered he had followed local missing persons cases obsessively online, even commenting anonymously on forums discussing her disappearance. For years he watched strangers debate theories about a crime only he understood completely. Ashley's voice softened again when she described how DNA testing doesn't only expose killers, sometimes it exposes entire families built on lies. A woman searching for her biological father submitted a recreational DNA kit hoping to learn about her ancestry. Instead, she discovered dozens of relatives connected to an unsolved homicide from the 1980s. At first, the connection seemed impossible, almost absurd, but investigators quickly realized the same family line appearing in her results also matched unidentified DNA collected from a murder victim decades earlier. The investigation reopened wounds people thought had healed. Detectives learned the woman's biological father had lived under multiple identities for years, drifting between states, changing jobs frequently, disappearing whenever questions became too specific. Neighbors described him as polite but emotionally hollow, like someone permanently rehearsing how to appear normal. The closer investigators got to him, the more frightened surviving relatives became, because they slowly realized the man they loved might also be responsible for horrors buried long before they knew his name. Then came the twist that changed everything. Ashley returned to the woman from the voicemail, the one whose call ended in static and silence. Detectives had spent years believing she'd been abducted by a stranger. DNA from beneath her fingernails pointed toward an unknown male profile, reinforcing the theory that someone had forced entry into the home. Investigators searched endlessly for a violent outsider while overlooking the one person who remained present through every stage of the investigation. Her younger brother. He had comforted their parents during press conferences, spoken emotionally to reporters, organized search parties, even volunteered his own DNA early in the case, which investigators initially excluded because the profile recovered at the scene appeared incomplete. But advances in probabilistic DNA analysis later revealed something chilling. The unknown male profile wasn't a stranger at all. It was a complex mixture partially masked by contamination and degradation. Once analysts reprocessed the evidence using modern software, the genetic markers aligned directly with the brother's DNA. Suddenly, every memory investigators had trusted became contaminated too. Detectives confronted him quietly, without cameras or dramatic arrests. Ashley described the interrogation room as painfully ordinary: fluorescent lights, cheap coffee, gray walls, the kind of place where monstrous truths sound even more disturbing because nothing around them feels cinematic. At first he denied everything. Then he started correcting investigators on details they never revealed publicly. The order of objects inside the kitchen, which family photo had been ripped, the exact wording of the voicemail transcript. Finally, investigators played the enhanced audio again. This time technology isolated the background voice more clearly. That single word now belonged to him. And the metallic rattling investigators heard in the background was identified as the chain latch on the basement door of the family home. Detectives realized the woman had never left the house alive. Her brother admitted they argued over money and inheritance after their parents changed their will. He claimed he lost control, but investigators later discovered evidence suggesting planning weeks in advance, including internet searches about destroying biological evidence and contaminating crime scenes with bleach. The final truth emerged slowly, like something rotting beneath floorboards finally breaking through the surface. After killing his sister, the brother hid her remains inside a sealed crawlspace beneath the house while pretending to help search for her publicly. Every candlelight vigil, every emotional interview, every tearful plea for answers happened while her body remained only feet beneath where mourners gathered. And for years, he believed he had beaten science simply because investigators lacked the tools to see what was already there. Ashley ended by explaining that DNA testing has changed criminal investigations forever, not because it creates certainty instantly, but because it refuses to forget STR testing, mitochondrial DNA, familial matching, forensic genealogy, touch DNA. Each method uncovers fragments people try desperately to hide: a breath, a fingerprint made of skin cell, a strand of saliva, a relative who unknowingly carries the truth inside their bloodstream. Killers often believe time erases evidence, but biology keeps score in silence, waiting for someone patient enough to listen. And somewhere tonight, in an evidence locker covered in dust, there is probably another box filled with tiny forgotten traces, already holding someone's name